Corporate Consolidated Returns, Tax Basics, Problem 1. The stock of Fruit Corp and Vegetable Inc. is publicly traded, and no shareholder owns more than a 1% interest in either corporation. Fruit Corp owns 40%, and Vegetable Inc. owns 60% of the stock of Tomato Corp., which owns 90% of the stock of Persimmon Inc. Vegetable Inc. and Persimmon Inc. each own 50% of the stock of Eggplant Corp. Which of these corporations forms an affiliated group eligible to file a consolidated tax return? Some of you are looking at this and you're saying, what in the world's going on here? So we're dealing with affiliated groups eligible to file consolidated corporate forms, consolidated returns. And the rule is if you have two C corporations or multiple C corporations, I should say multiple C corporations that they're all U.S. So they have to be U.S. corporations, so U.S. corps, and you have 80% or more direct or indirect ownership in terms of the group, in terms of control group of these parties together, okay? Then you're able to basically file a consolidated return. Okay, that's what we call them, consolidated returns. Okay, you're eligible to file a consolidated return. So the idea is we call it like a parent-subsidiary relationship. Now, these are all C corporations in this problem, and we denote C corporations by using a rectangle. Okay, rectangle. So let's say we have a parent. Parent owns 100% of subsidiary. 100% of subsidiary. And parent is Walmart Corporation, subsidiary is Sam's Club. Well, the idea is that basically this is just one tax return. Just Sam's Club, it files a subsidiary return, but it flows up to the parent and it actually gets reported as a consolidated return for both entities to the IRS. That's the idea, is that you can basically use NOLs, net operating losses, and certain tax benefits, and you can basically roll them up to the parent because of this 80% or more direct or indirect control. So here for this question, it's just asking which of the corporations in the question can file or are eligible together. So that's the idea, is you have to look for it together. You have to look at a relationship like this where you have two people together. It can't just be one by itself. It's going to be multiple. There's not going to just be one by itself. It's going to be multiple entities. At least two is going to be the answer. You could have three. You could have something like this. You could have, Corporation A owns Corporation B, and Corporation B owns Corporation C, and let's say it's 100%, and this is 80%. Well, this would all be one consolidated return. So that's kind of the idea. You're looking for direct or indirect control. Now, the reason why we say indirect control is that you can actually have indirect control through another party that's through ownership. That can get really complex. I'm trying to keep it a little bit more basic, and I'll explain if there is any indirect here. But the direct is obvious, right? In these examples, these are direct, below you. And by the way, these corporate structures and charts, that's how we denote something being owned below, is we have the arrow below, going below them, okay? And I'll try to do that with our example starting at the top. Now, before we jump into the structure, and that's the best way to look at this is to create a structure like this and kind of do arrows and see where things go. One thing to note is it helps in these types of questions. If you're looking at the different corporations, just write down first, before you even do the corporate chart, what are the different options? So what are the possibilities? So it might just be more than two. It could be 2, 3, 4. Well, here there's up to 5. So what I'm saying is write down all 5 corporations. So the 5 corporations, just start off. We've got Fruit Corp. So we'll write that one down first. Fruit Corporation. Fruit Corp. The next one we're told is Vegetable Inc. Let me make that a little bit cleaner. Sorry about that. Vegetable Inc. is the next one. So Vegetable Inc. Okay. And then the next one we're told is Tomato Corp. So we've got Tomato Corp. Tomato Corp. And then after that, we're told the next one is Persimmon Inc. So we have Persimmon Inc. And then finally, the last one is Eggplant. So it helps you in these questions if you just go through and look for the different parties at first, the different corporations. And again, remember, it has to be C corporations, multiple C corporations, and they all here are C corporations because they say Corp, Inc., and I don't tell you any of them are S corporations. Okay, so now what we need to do is kind of thinking about our rules, right? They're all, and by the way, nothing here says that they're not a U.S. Corp, so we assume they're a U.S. Corp. In another problem, we're going to look at corporations that are outside the U.S. and see how that affects things. But right now, there's nothing here that says like where they are, so we assume because they're corporations, they're all C corporations, and we also assume they're U.S. domestic corporations. So we start by saying, okay, we got Fruit Corp. I'm just going to use the first names, Fruit Corp, and we've got Vegetable Inc. Put Vegetable Inc. over here. So Fruit and Vegetable Inc. And again, we do rectangles for C corporations. And they're both publicly traded, and no shareholder owns more than 1% interest in either corporation. So that means basically that you're not going to have anybody above these that are going to get consolidated because nobody owns 80% or more. That's what I'm trying to say there. So Fruit Corp owns 40%, and Vegetable Inc. owns 60% of the stock of Tomato Corporation. So how do we denote that? So we're going to draw an arrow down, right, because of ownership, down. So this is a parent-subsidiary relationship. And the arrow, you want to put the ownership. So Fruit owns 40%, and Vegetable owns 60% of the next corporation below, which is Tomato. Okay, so we have Tomato. And then we're also told Tomato owns 90% of Persimmon Inc. So we put a line below there, below Tomato, to Persimmon. And that's 90%. Finally, there's one more, that's eggplant, right? So we've gone through fruit, vegetable, tomato, persimmon. I'm looking on the right side there. We've got eggplant. So we're told that eggplant is owned by two, vegetable and persimmon. So persimmon owns 50% of eggplant, and vegetable owns the other 50%. So the question here is these five, this is the corporate structure. This is what it looks like. These five corporations, you see the corporate structure. Do we have anything like the parent subsidiary 100% or at least 80%? We're looking for 80%. Now the issue though, so you go through these numbers, right? And you see, okay, tomato, persimmon right there. We definitely have a winner, right? Boom, 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 ding, ding, ding. We got a winner. But what about these other ones? So Fruit Corporation tomato, no, it's 40%, right? And fruit is over here on the left by itself. So basically that means that fruit's not going to be eligible for anything because it's not related. Because remember, it's direct or indirect. So the first thing you want to do is you want to look for direct percentages. So we just found direct, right? Do you see 80% or more by any of these entities? That would be direct. So the next thing we consider, we just did direct. The only one that owns direct is tomato. Tomato owns directly 80% or more persimmon. So right there, we've got at least two. So we know for the question, which of these corporations can form an affiliated group or eligible to form a consolidated tax return with another person, basically is what it's asking. We know tomato can, and we know persimmon can. We know those two corporations, yes. So I'll circle them as well to make it clear. Fruit cannot, because fruit has no relationship other than this. So we can cross out fruit, kind of process of elimination. Fruit is now eliminated. Fruit's gone because fruit's over here by itself. That brings us to, what about vegetable and what about eggplant? So notice that vegetable has 60% of tomato, tomato has 90% of persimmon, and then 50% of eggplant. So the question is, okay, well, it looks like there's some type of like commonality here, right? Because persimmon, you can work your way up back to vegetable in a way, right? You can work your way up back to that. That's kind of the idea there. So I'm going to explain indirect ownership. What we do is first let's start by asking, can vegetable basically be part of the group of tomato and persimmon? And the answer is no. Vegetable and tomato cannot. Why? Because vegetable to tomato does not have 80% or more, and there's nobody else that's in common with vegetable that owns tomato, because fruit and vegetable are not related. So basically that one, vegetable, tomato, cannot be together. So that right there severs the line to go from vegetable, tomato, tomato to persimmon, persimmon to eggplant. It won't work that way. What about the other play? What if you're thinking about it from the lens of the other side? Well, the idea there is if you sever that relationship, then you can't use the vegetable to eggplant, that 50%, and then you can't, this is what you do. So persimmon, if you're thinking, what about persimmon to eggplant, right? Because persimmon is own common, has 50% of eggplant, but then persimmon goes to tomato and vegetable that direction. If you're thinking about whether persimmon can get an affiliated group of eggplant. Well, that one is a little bit more promising, okay? So again, let me explain. Vegetable to tomato, there's not 80% and there's no other commonality of ownership. But persimmon to eggplant, persimmon has 50%, but there is, so that's not enough for direct ownership, right? Because you have to have 80% or more. So for the indirect ownership, that's vegetable, and vegetable is related to persimmon indirectly. So the way that we calculate that is we take persimmon's 50% ownership, and then what you do is the 50% vegetable owns, you basically have to kind of multiply those numbers so that you have 50% times 60% is 30%, and 30% times 90% is 27%. So then that would be persimmon owns 50%, and then there would be 27% of indirect ownership, which is 77, which does not equal 80. Now, some of you are out there saying, well, how the heck did you do that? Am I going to have to do all that calculations? The answer is no. When I do this, I was just showing you a more complex example. For purposes of you just need to focus on the direct relationships. That's all I care about you understanding. When you see a direct relationship like tomato and persimmon, that's when you've got it. I obviously showed you why this is more complex, correct? Because again, vegetable to tomato, there's no commonality there where vegetable can get more than 60%. There's no indirect. And then persimmon to eggplant, there is direct ownership of 50%, not enough, but there also is indirect, but the indirect only equals 27. It has to be 80% or more, so we don't have it. Okay, and again, the way we got to 77% is 50% direct ownership, and the 27% indirect was the 50% that vegetable owns of eggplant times 60 is 30%, times 90 is 27. So that's how we got that, right? It's the 50.5 times the 0.6 times the 0.9 equals 27%. If you go this way to try to get persimmon's indirect ownership. That's how we think about things, certain things in tax. So that means that vegetable is not going to qualify, so we can cross out vegetable. And then eggplant, unfortunately, does not have any commonality, if anybody as well. That was the last one we considered. So therefore, the only parties here that can get affiliated group are Tomato Corp and Persimmon Inc., and that's it. So I have additional problems on this, but really, again, the main thing to focus on is that 80% or more direct or indirect ownership. I really focus on the direct ownership, U.S. corporations. Make sure you review that.